My name is Sergeant First Class Sarah Vance, and until tonight, my own sister believed I was a dishonorable discharge working for tips at $18 an hour. The military gala at the United States Embassy in Paris was a Shark Tank in silk and metals, a high-stakes masquerade where the scent of Chanel No. 5 mingled with the metallic tang of unspoken threats. I moved through the 35 circular tables, each carrying a $4,500 price tag per plate, wearing a stiff polyester catering uniform that felt like sandpaper against my skin. To the elite gathered under the 12 massive baccarat crystal chandeliers, I was invisible, just another nameless pair of hands pouring vintage 2012 Dom Perignon into delicate flutes. Across the polished marble floor of the Grand Salle, my older sister, Emily, stood like a crimson flame in a custom-tailored red Valentino gown that cost more than my first year's combat pay. At 32, she held the title of senior liaison with a $140,000 salary and a heart of ice that could freeze the Seine in mid-July. When her eyes finally locked onto mine, she didn't lower her voice to save me from the humiliation she assumed I deserved. "Well, look at you," she sneered, her voice cutting through the soft orchestral rendition of Debussy's Clair de Lune. "Just a waitress now? I guess the Air Force finally realized you were dead weight." She took a slow, deliberate sip from her crystal glass, her eyes scanning my cheap black apron with a look of pure, unadulterated pity. I kept my face neutral, my breathing rhythmic, and my pulse a steady 62 beats per minute, a habit drilled into me during 3 tours in high-intelligence reconnaissance. She had no idea that the handle of the silver serving tray I carried contained a recessed 4K microlens with a wide-angle field of vision, or that my left cufflink was actually a military-grade directional microphone capable of picking up a whisper from 40 feet away. While she saw a failure in a service vest, the Tactical Operations Center 3 miles away saw a high-definition feed of the Russian attaché sitting 3 seats to her left. But I am getting ahead of myself. Now let me take you back to the moment the gap between us became a canyon. While Emily was attending Ivy League mixers and climbing the bureaucratic ladder in D.C., I was crawling through the mud of specialized training, becoming the daughter our parents never talked about at their country club dinners in Greenwich, Connecticut. They had cut me off the moment I chose the uniform over the law degree they had mapped out for me, and Emily had been more than happy to fill the vacuum of their affection. She was the golden child, the one who sent postcards from Swiss ski resorts while I was sending encrypted sitraps from windowless rooms. Seeing her here, draped in $10,000 worth of Italian silk and mocking my supposed downfall, sparked a familiar cold fire in my chest. The injustice of it was a bitter pill, but my mission dictated my silence. As she leaned in, her perfume, a cloying mix of jasmine and arrogance, filling my senses, she whispered that I should try not to spill any gravy on the ambassador, as his suit cost more than my life insurance policy. I simply nodded, the microlens capturing the precise movement of the man behind her as he slipped a thumb drive into a discarded folder. Emily thought she was the pinnacle of success in this room, but she was merely a background character in a much more dangerous game. The contrast between her perceived triumph and my hidden reality was a weight I carried with practiced ease. Family is supposed to be the one place where you aren't judged by your rank or your bank account, but I had learned long ago that for the Vances, blood was just another currency to be traded for status. I moved away from her, my shoes silent on the marble, focusing on the rhythmic hum of the digital transmission in my ear. The mission was moving into its final phase, and while Emily was busy celebrating her social standing, I was busy making sure there was still a world left for her to brag in. Family isn't blood. Family is who stays when the masks come off and the truth finally comes out. My name is Catherine Leroy, and 3 years ago I was a captain in cyber defense with a trajectory that pointed straight toward the Pentagon, but in less than an hour my sister Emily turned my life into a digital crime scene. Back then I lived in a $2,200 a month apartment in the Navy Yard district of D.C., a place filled with the hum of high-end servers and the smell of expensive dark roast coffee. My only true indulgence was a meticulously restored 1968 Highland Green Mustang Fastback, a car that roared with 325 horsepower and felt like the only honest thing in a city built on lies. While I spent 14-hour shifts in windowless SIFs tracking state-sponsored breaches and protecting the nation's most sensitive infrastructure, Emily was busy being the perennial golden child of the Leroy family. She had a specialized talent for accumulating $80,000 credit card debts at boutiques on Rodeo Drive and high-end spas in Aspen, only to have our father use his political influence to quietly wipe her slate clean every single time. The contrast between us was a constant ache. I was the one working until my eyes bled for a government salary while she spent her days networking at $500 a ticket fundraisers, draped in jewelry that cost more than my car. The breaking point arrived on a humid Tuesday morning when a massive radar data leak occurred. A breach so precise it bypassed every failsafe we had in place. Within 48 minutes, my world was systematically dismantled because the evidence had been surgically planted on my private terminal with a sophistication that suggested an insider's touch. I remember the cold weight of the air conditioning as the MPs escorted me out, my security clearance stripped and my career incinerated before I could even find a lawyer. Emily was standing in the marble hallway of the agency, not out of support, but to witness the spectacle of my fall. As I carried my single cardboard box containing a few technical manuals and a framed photo of my graduation from West Point, she leaned in close enough for me to smell her expensive Jo Malone perfume. "You should have just played the game, Katie," she whispered with a smirk that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "Now you are absolutely nothing." The injustice of that moment burned a hole in my soul that no amount of time could heal. My father didn't even take my call, and my mother sent a brief email saying they were disappointed that I had brought such shame to the Leroy name. They didn't care about the truth. They cared about the optics of having a daughter who was a disgraced officer. I lost the apartment, I lost the Mustang, and I lost the respect of every peer I had ever bled for. Emily took everything I had worked for and used it as a footstool to climb even higher into her liaison role, painting herself as the grieving sister of a traitor to gain sympathy in the halls of power. But as I stand here now in this catering uniform, watching her flaunt her stolen status, I realize that her greatest mistake was believing that taking my rank meant taking my skills. She thought she broke me, but she only untethered me from the rules that used to hold me back. I spent 3 years in the shadows, rebuilding my life with the precision of a ghost, and every bit of data I am currently collecting through this tray handle is a nail in the coffin of her carefully constructed lie. Family is supposed to be a sanctuary, a place of unconditional belief and support, but I learned in that hallway that for some, family is just a convenient shield to hide behind while they stab you in the back. Family is not about shared DNA. It is about the loyalty that remains when the lights go out and the world turns its back on you. The betrayal was orchestrated with surgical precision inside a windowless briefing room at the United States Air Force Headquarters, a space that smelled of ozone from the humming server racks and the stale, burnt odor of old coffee from a half-empty pot of Folgers in the corner. Colonel Mason sat across from me, his face a mask of disappointment as he laid out a manila folder containing 14 specific timestamps of my personal login credentials accessing classified NATO specifications. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered with a rhythmic buzz that felt like a countdown to my execution, and as I looked at the dark observation glass to my left, I didn't see my own reflection. I saw the ghostly silhouette of Emily standing in the shadows of the viewing gallery. She wasn't just watching my career burn to the ground. She was leaning in toward Philip Vaughn, a high-level defense contractor with a $60,000 Patek Philippe on his wrist and a reputation for acquiring secrets that weren't for sale. Emily was smirking, her lips curved into a sharp, predatory line as she whispered something into Vaughn's ear, her victory authenticated by the very data she had helped him steal from my secure terminal. They didn't just take my stripes that day. They took my security clearance, my hard-earned pension, and every shred of pride I had built over a decade of service. The fall was vertical and unforgiving, leading me from the high-tech corridors of the Pentagon to a drafty 450-square-foot repair shop in a dying corner of Maine where the heating vents rattled and the smell of solder hung heavy in the air. While Emily moved to Paris to live in a $6,000 a month embassy-sponsored suite overlooking the Seine, I spent my days hunched over a cluttered workbench, fixing cracked iPhone 12 screens for $40 a pop for locals who barely knew my name. My world had shrunk to the size of a microscopic circuit board, my tools reduced to a set of precision screwdrivers and a heat gun instead of the multi-million-dollar firewalls I used to command. Every time I replaced a shattered glass digitizer for a teenager or recovered photos from a water-damaged Samsung, I felt the phantom weight of the metals I no longer owned. But Emily's arrogance was her only blind spot, because she assumed that stripping me of my rank meant stripping me of my mind, forgetting that a caged wolf spends every second studying the lock. Now, standing here in this embassy ballroom in my cheap polyester waiter's vest, The contrast between my current reality and her opulence is a physical weight. I can see the way she tosses her hair, the way she moves through the crowd of dignitaries like she owns the very air they breathe, completely unaware that the disgraced sister she discarded is currently intercepting every packet of data moving through her secure liaison network. She thought she left me to rot in the cold of Maine, but she actually gave me the perfect cover to become the ghost she never saw coming. Watching her sip her champagne while I adjust the microlens on my tray handle is a reminder that the most dangerous enemy is the one you believe you have already defeated. Family is supposed to be the anchor that keeps you steady in a storm, but I realized in that briefing room that for some, family is just the person who holds your head under the water to see if you can still breathe. Family isn't the blood that flows in your veins. Family is the trust that remains when everything else has been stripped away. 6 months into my exile, a brutal nor'easter slammed into the coast of Maine, rattling the thin windows of my drafty $40 night rental and forcing me back to the skeletal remains of our family home to check for structural leaks. The attic was a graveyard of memories, smelling of mothballs and damp cedar, where the rain drummed a frantic metallic rhythm against the aged shingles overhead. While I was moving a stack of water-damaged boxes containing my old flight manuals, my boot caught on a slightly raised, irregular floorboard near the chimney stack. Prying it up revealed a hidden compartment containing a charcoal gray SentrySafe 1200 fireproof box, its surface coated in a fine layer of gray dust that felt like SH against my fingertips. My heart hammered against my ribs at a frantic 110 beats per minute as I entered the code, my own childhood birthday March 14th, and heard the heavy mechanical click of the locking bolt retracting. Inside the felt-lined interior sat a professional-grade 2TB encrypted Western Digital solid-state drive and a leather-bound handwritten journal belonging to my late father, a man I had spent 3 years mourning and resenting in equal measure. I flipped to the final entry, dated the night before the suspicious single-vehicle accident that took his life on a slick Connecticut highway, and the words hit me with the force of a physical blow. "The leak isn't Katie," he had written in his cramped, precise script. "It is the Ally Network, and Emily is far too close to Philip Vaughn." The journal went on to detail how he had discovered Emily was funneling classified defense analytics through Vaughn's private contractors to fund her escalating lifestyle, and his final sentence was a desperate command from the grave to finish what he couldn't. I sat on that freezing, unfinished plywood floor for 4 agonizing hours, the cold seeping into my bones as the realization of the massive injustice settled over me like a shroud. Using the dim, flickering light of a rechargeable Milwaukee work lamp and the back of a greasy $22 Domino's pizza receipt, I began to map out a multi-phase revenge plan that would utilize every clandestine skill the Air Force had paid $250,000 to teach me. I realized then that my dishonorable discharge hadn't been an end, but a necessary shedding of my public identity so I could operate in the dark where Emily and Vaughn felt most secure. The drive contained the raw data packets that proved the source of the radar leak originated from Emily's own biometric credentials, which she had used while I was pulled into a mandatory fitness evaluation she had conveniently scheduled for me. The sheer scale of her betrayal was breathtaking, a calculated sacrifice of her own sister's life and honor just to maintain her standing in the high society circles of DC and Paris. As the storm howled outside, I felt a predatory calm settle over me, a cold clarity that replaced the heat of my anger with the precision of a mission profile. I wasn't just a disgraced captain anymore. I was a ghost with a roadmap to her destruction and a digital arsenal that could dismantle her world bit by bite. I spent the rest of the night cross-referencing her known bank accounts with the shell companies my father had flagged, seeing the trail of blood money that paid for her $6,000-a-month Parisian lifestyle. Family is supposed to be the bedrock of your existence, the one thing that remains solid when the ground shifts beneath your feet. But I finally understood that for the Leroys, family was just a tactical asset to be liquidated for a higher profit margin. Family isn't about the name on your birth certificate. Family is the person who leaves a light on for you in the dark when everyone else wants you to disappear. I spent 112 consecutive nights in the flickering blue light of a dual monitor setup, my eyes straining against the lines of code as I methodically chipped away at my father's sophisticated 256-bit IS encryption. When the final layer of security finally buckled at 3:42 in the morning, the digital floodgates opened to reveal a labyrinthine web of 48 offshore accounts, primarily staged in the Cayman Islands and Cyprus, which Philip Vaughn had been utilizing to systematically bribe high-ranking NATO officials. The most damning evidence wasn't the money itself, but the digital signatures and travel logs that proved Emily had been acting as the primary courier, moving between Brussels, Washington, and Zurich under the guise of official liaison business while actually facilitating the sale of Western security. To turn this data into a weapon, I reached out to Tom, a high-level mercenary hacker whose life I had saved during a chaotic extraction in Kabul back when I still wore the uniform of a captain. We didn't use phones or standard encrypted apps. Instead, we met via a custom ghost server at 2:15 in the morning, our conversation echoing through a series of redirected IP addresses that made us invisible to the NSA's standard sweeps. I told him I needed my name on the Paris Gala staff roster, not as Catherine Leroy, the disgraced officer, but as someone who could walk right past my sister without drawing a second glance. 3 days later, Tom sent me the coordinates for a dead drop located in a rusted coin-operated locker at the Gare du Nord train station in the heart of Paris. Inside a nondescript black gym bag, I found a tactical kit that would have made a field agent jealous. A state-of-the-art bone conduction earpiece that sat invisibly behind my jaw, a signal jammer disguised as a midnight black Fitbit Sense 2, and a flawlessly forged French national ID card under the name Catherine Lee, a professional server with 10 years of experience in high-end catering. The total cost for these tools and the digital insertion into the embassy's security database was $15,000 in untraceable Bitcoin, which represented every single cent of the savings I had scraped together from fixing cracked phone screens and sleeping on a thin mattress in that drafty main shop. I didn't hesitate for a second to click the send button on that transfer, knowing that I was effectively trading my entire future for one night of absolute justice. I spent the next 48 hours memorizing the floor plan of the U.S. Embassy on Avenue Gabriel, noting every security camera blind spot and the exact timing of the catering staff rotations. While Emily was likely preparing for the gala by choosing which designer shoes would best complement her vanity, I was in a cramped 10-square-meter hostel room in the 10th arrondissement, practicing the precise, invisible movements of a high-end waitress while recalibrating my hidden lens. The contrast between my meticulous preparation and her blind arrogance was the only thing that kept me focused as the weight of the mission settled over my shoulders. She thought she had buried me under the weight of a dishonorable discharge, but she had actually just forced me to refine my craft until I was the most dangerous version of myself. Family is supposed to be the one place where you are safe from the predatory nature of the world, but I had learned through 100 nights of decryption that for the Leroys, family was just a cover story for a criminal enterprise. Family isn't about shared history or a common surname. Family is the person who is willing to burn their own life to the ground just to ensure the truth finally sees the light of day. I looked at the Catherine Lee ID one last time before tucking it into my pocket, knowing that by the time the sun rose over the Eiffel Tower, the Golden Child's reign would be nothing but a memory in a federal indictment. The gala was the ultimate trap, a gilded cage filled with 45 high-ranking generals and 12 international ambassadors, all of them oblivious to the digital warfare unfolding between the appetizers and the main course. The air inside the embassy ballroom was thick with the suffocating scent of $200 an ounce Roja Parfez and the savory, heavy aroma of herb-crusted roasted lamb being served on fine bone china. I maintained my posture as I tracked Philip Vaughan across the room, watching through the periphery of my vision as he adjusted his custom-tailored tuxedo jacket before slipping a sleek, 64GB silver thumb drive into the breast pocket of a French defense contractor named Duval. My tray-handle camera, stabilized by a miniature internal gimbal, captured the entire handoff in 60 frames per second high definition, providing the kind of undeniable forensic evidence that would hold up in any court-martial or federal hearing. Emily followed them like a shadow, a silent partner in the treasonous transaction, nodding her approval with a cold, professional efficiency that made my skin crawl. As she circled back toward the bar, she walked directly past me, intentionally catching my shoulder with her own to jar the tray I was holding. "Still here?" she hissed, her voice a poisonous whisper that barely carried over the clinking of silverware. "Go fetch more Chardonnay, Captain Failure." I didn't blink or offer a single word of protest, keeping my eyes fixed on a point just past her expensive diamond earrings while my heart rate remained a tactical 64 beats per minute. The contrast between her smug sense of superiority and the reality of her situation was almost poetic. She thought she was stepping on a bug, but she was actually walking into a minefield of her own making. As she moved away to charm a group of NATO attachés, I reached for the matte black wristband of my signal-jamming Fitbit and pressed the recessed transmitter button twice, initiating an encrypted burst transmission. The live high-definition feed of the handoff, along with the decrypted bank records from our father's hidden drive, was sent directly to the secure, ruggedized tablet of General Marcus Delaney, the man who had signed my commendation in Kabul and the only person in the room with the authority to bypass the embassy's standard security protocols. I watched from 20 feet away as the general's aide leaned in and tapped him on the shoulder, handing him the device with a look of sheer, panicked intensity. The transition in the room was almost instantaneous as the general's eyes scanned the screen, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury that I had only seen once before on a live battlefield. He didn't look at the ambassadors or the silk-draped socialites. He looked directly at Philip Vaughan and then shifted his gaze to Emily, who was currently laughing at a joke made by a Belgian diplomat. The injustice that had fueled my every waking moment for the last 3 years began to dissipate, replaced by the clinical satisfaction of a mission reaching its terminal phase. Emily had spent her entire life believing that money and influence were a shield that could protect her from any consequence, but she had forgotten that in my world, the only thing that matters is the truth of the data. I stood perfectly still, a silent witness in my cheap polyester uniform, watching as the security detail began to mobilize with quiet, lethal precision. Family is supposed to be the one place where you find unconditional loyalty, but I had learned that for some, family is just a resource to be exploited until it runs dry. Family isn't about the blood you share. It is about the courage to stand for what is right even when the people who raised you are the ones doing wrong. I watched the general stand up, his medals catching the light of the baccarat chandeliers, and I knew that for Emily the game wasn't just over, it was being erased. General Delaney, a 4-star general with 35 years of decorated service and a reputation for being as unyielding as the granite of West Point, froze in the middle of a toast to international cooperation, his crystal glass suspended in the air like a relic of a dying era. He looked down at his vibrating Panasonic ToughPad tablet, his brow furrowing as the high-definition 4K feed from my tray camera began to play the undeniable loop of the silver thumb drive passing from Philip Vaughan into the hands of the French contractor Duval. I stood exactly 5 feet away from him, my back straight with a military posture that no cheap polyester catering vest could ever truly disguise, holding a silver tray of empty champagne flutes that felt as light as a feather in my steady hands. I took a single deliberate step forward, shedding the persona of the invisible waitress and reclaiming the space as a soldier, my presence suddenly becoming the gravitational center of the entire 300-person ballroom. "Sir," I said, my voice projecting with the command authority of a field officer and cutting through the soft, syncopated rhythm of the live jazz band like a sharpened blade, "I believe you will find the 9:42 p.m. footage currently streaming to your screen quite enlightening regarding the internal origins of the NATO radar breach and the subsequent sale of our strategic defense protocols." The room went into a sudden vacuum-like silence, the kind of oppressive quiet that usually precedes a massive atmospheric shift, as the dignitaries and socialites realized the social fabric of the evening was being torn apart in real time. Somewhere near the buffet table, a younger waiter startled by the sudden tension dropped a white ceramic plate of smoked salmon hors d'oeuvres, and the sound of it shattering against the polished marble floor echoed through the grand salle like a gunshot, making Emily jump in her crimson Valentino gown. Her face, which had been flushed with the rosy glow of expensive wine and the arrogance of her own untouchable status, turned a sickly, translucent shade of gray as she saw the general's gaze shift from the tablet directly to her. I watched as the realization began to dawn on her that the sister she had mocked as dead weight and a captain failure was the very architect of her imminent destruction. The contrast between the $500 a plate luxury of the evening and the cold, hard reality of a federal treason charge was now unavoidable, and I felt a singular chilling sense of satisfaction as the general signaled for his security detail to move in. Philip Vaughan tried to make a subtle move toward the arched exit leading to the gardens, his $60,000 Patek Philippe glinting under the 12 baccarat chandeliers, but he was intercepted by 2 plainclothes MPs who seemed to materialize out of the shadows with the efficiency of a pre-planned extraction. I didn't look away from Emily, maintaining a neutral expression even as her eyes darted around the room, searching for a way to play the game one last time, to find a father or a favor that could bail her out of an $80,000 moral debt. But there was no one left to protect the golden child, not when the evidence was being broadcast in high definition to the highest-ranking officer in the room. The injustice of my 3-year exile in a drafty $40 a night shop in Maine was finally being balanced by the weight of the truth. A digital reckoning that no amount of family influence or political networking could ever hope to suppress. Family is supposed to be the one place where you are safe from betrayal, the one sanctuary where your name is protected by those who share it. But I had learned through the cold light of a laptop screen that for the Leroys, family was just a tactical liability. Family isn't the blood that links you to a legacy of lies. Family is the integrity you maintain when the rest of your world is built on a foundation of stolen secrets. I set my tray down on the general's table with a final metallic click, knowing that the ghost of Captain Catherine Leroy had finally come home to finish the mission my father had started. I didn't use emotions because emotions are volatile and easily dismissed by the powerful. So instead I used the only language the Leroy family truly understood, which was cold, undeniable data. With a practiced motion that felt like the culmination of 1,000 hours of tactical training, I pulled a slim, ruggedized Getac tablet from the concealed inner pocket of my polyester catering jacket and slaved it to the ballroom's massive high-definition projection screens that were usually reserved for displaying the flags of allied nations. 300 guests, including the most influential military and diplomatic minds in Europe, watched in a collective, paralyzed silence as the video played on a loop for all to see. There was Philip Vaughn clearly handing over the 64-gigabyte silver drive, followed by Emily's unmistakable nod of approval, and finally a scrolling spreadsheet detailing $2,400,000 in illicit bribes routed through 48 offshore accounts. Emily's face turned a violent, oscillating shade of crimson that nearly matched the $10,000 silk of her red Valentino dress as she realized the golden shield of her reputation was being incinerated in front of her peers. "This is a fake," she screamed, her voice cracking under the weight of a panic she had never before experienced. "She is just a disgruntled dropout who couldn't cut it in the real world." But her words were hollow echoes against the backdrop of the technical forensic data I had layered over the footage, showing the exact metadata and biometric signatures that tied the breach directly to her embassy-issued credentials. General Delaney stood up with a deliberate slowness that commanded the room, his face looking as though it had been carved from the very granite of the West Point Highlands, and he didn't even bother to look at the wine he had just been toasted with. "Military police, secure all primary and secondary exits immediately," he barked with a voice that carried the weight of 35 years of undisputed command. "And arrest Mr. Vaughn and Ms. Leroy on the immediate charge of espionage against the United States and its NATO allies." The contrast between the soft jazz that was still weakly playing in the background and the sharp metallic click of handcuffs being ratcheted shut over Emily's slender wrists was the most beautiful sound I had heard in 3 years. I watched as the MPs, their boots echoing with a heavy thud against the marble floor of the grand salle, led my sister away while she continued to shriek about our father's influence, oblivious to the fact that our father had been the one to leave me the map to her prison cell. The injustice of my dishonorable discharge was being rewritten in the minds of everyone in that room, replaced by the reality of a captain who had operated from the shadows to save a network they didn't even know was compromised. As Vaughn was tackled near the gold-leafed doors, his $60,000 watch skidding across the floor, I felt the phantom weight of my own stripes returning to my shoulders. Standing there in my cheap black apron, surrounded by the elite of the military world, I realized that the Leroy name was finally being cleansed of the rot that had been festering in the dark for far too long. Family is supposed to be the one place where you find an unbreakable bond of trust and shared values, but I had learned that for some, family is just a convenient cover for the most egregious betrayals. Family isn't about the status you inherit or the money you can hide in a Cayman account. Family is the legacy of truth you leave behind when the lights are turned on and the masks are finally stripped away. I looked at the general and gave a sharp, crisp salute, a gesture that signaled the official end of my exile and the beginning of a reckoning Emily would never survive. The fallout from the Paris Gala was a tactical nuclear strike delivered with digital precision to the very center of Emily's carefully curated life, a detonation that left nothing but the radioactive remains of her social standing and her freedom. Because the crimes involved the unauthorized distribution of high-level NATO secrets and the subversion of national security protocols, the federal judge in the District of Columbia deemed her a catastrophic flight risk and denied her any possibility of bail, a decision that stripped away the last of her unearned confidence. Her vast network of friends, the same people who had toasted her with $500 bottles of vintage champagne just days prior, vanished faster than a 30-second television advertisement during a Super Bowl blackout. The $140,000 annual salary that had funded her $6,000-a-month Parisian lifestyle was frozen instantly by the Department of Justice, replaced by the grim reality of a harried, court-appointed attorney who didn't bother to return her frantic, collect calls from the Alexandria Detention Center. The State Department acted with a cold, administrative efficiency that I had once admired as a captain, officially revoking her diplomatic immunity within 72 hours of her initial arrest and leaving her completely exposed to the full weight of federal prosecution. I sat in the third row of the gallery during her preliminary hearing, wearing a sharp charcoal gray wool suit from Brooks Brothers that felt like a new suit of armor, and watched as the sister who had systematically dismantled my life was led out by two expressionless U.S. Marshals. Her $900 Christian Louboutin heels, the ones she had once joked were worth more than my entire military career, clicked rhythmically against the cold terrazzo floor of the courtroom with a hollow, metallic sound. It was the exact same acoustic signature she had made 3 years earlier when she stood in the hallway of the Air Force headquarters, smirking as I carried my single cardboard box of belongings out into the rain. The contrast between her former opulence and the heavy steel handcuffs biting into her wrists was a visual manifestation of the justice I had spent 1,100 days pursuing through the fog of my own exile. Philip Vaughn had already begun the process of turning state's evidence in a desperate bid to reduce his own life sentence, providing a 300-page deposition that detailed every single bribe and every encrypted communication Emily had ever facilitated. The injustice of my dishonorable discharge was being formally vacated in a separate closed-door session with General Delaney and the JAG Corps, but the real victory wasn't the return of my rank or the restoration of my back pay. The real victory was watching the golden child realize that the currency of our father's influence had finally been devalued to zero in a world where data is the only true king. As she was ushered through the heavy oak doors toward the transport van, she caught my eye for a fleeting second, and for the first time in our lives, the ice in her gaze had melted into a pool of pure, unadulterated terror. Family is supposed to be the one place where you are safe from the predatory nature of the world, but I had learned that for the Leroys, family was just a tactical asset to be liquidated for a higher profit margin until the books were finally balanced. Family isn't about the name on your birth certificate or the high society events you attend. Family is the unwavering loyalty that remains when the lights of the gala go out and the truth is the only thing left standing in the room. I walked out of that courthouse and into the crisp afternoon air, knowing that while Emily's heels had made their final click on a public floor, my own journey back into the light had only just begun. Philip Vaughn flipped with the cold, calculated efficiency of a man who had spent his entire life trading other people's futures for his own comfort, accepting a 15-year federal sentence in a medium-security facility in exchange for providing every granular detail of how Emily helped him frame me for the NATO radar breach. During 3 grueling days of sworn testimony in a windowless hearing room that smelled of floor wax and expensive legal stationery, he admitted that my own sister had provided him with my biometric login credentials and administrative overrides in exchange for a $500,000 consulting fee that was funneled through a series of shell companies into a private account at the Butterfield Bank in the Cayman Islands. The United States Air Force, finally seeing the digital blood on their own hands, issued a formal 12-page apology on heavy vellum paper, signed in blue ink by the Secretary of the Air Force herself, a document that detailed the systemic failures that had allowed a dedicated officer to be discarded like common trash. They officially cleared my record of the dishonorable discharge, replacing the black mark with a meritorious service medal and an offer to return to active duty with a promotion to the rank of major, along with a lump sum payment of $312,000 in back pay, interest and housing allowances that had been withheld during my 3 years of exile. I sat in a high-back leather chair in a quiet office at the Pentagon, looking at the commission papers that would have restored the life I thought I wanted, and I realized that the woman who had survived on $40 phone repairs in a drafty shop in Maine was no longer the Captain Catherine Leroy they were trying to buy back. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water from a glass that didn't have a micro lens hidden in the base, and I politely turned the offer down, choosing instead to walk away from the uniform that had failed to protect me from the person I shared a dinner table with for 20 years. I had discovered during the long freezing nights of my surveillance mission that I liked being invisible much more than I liked the heavy weight of silver oak leaves on my shoulders, finding a strange and potent power in the ability to move through a room without being perceived as a threat. The injustice that had once been a jagged glass shard in my heart had been smoothed over by the cold reality of the data I had recovered, proving that while they could take my rank and my pension, they could never touch the specialized mind that had dismantled an international espionage ring from a catering van. Emily was eventually moved to a federal correctional institution in West Virginia, her designer wardrobe replaced by a coarse orange jumpsuit and her $6,000 a month Parisian view replaced by a narrow slit of reinforced glass overlooking a gravel yard. I used a portion of my back pay to buy back my restored 1968 Highland Green Mustang Fastback from the collector in Maryland who had purchased it at my bankruptcy auction, the engine still roaring with the same honest, mechanical fury that had been my only comfort during the darkest days of my disgrace. As I drove down the coast with the windows down, the salt air of the Atlantic filling the cabin, I felt the final tether to the Leroy legacy snap, leaving me as a ghost in a world that finally knew the truth but would never see me coming again. Family is supposed to be the one place where you are safe from the predatory nature of the world, a sanctuary of shared blood and unshakable trust. But I had learned through the fire of betrayal that for some, family is just a tactical asset to be liquidated for a higher profit margin. Family isn't about the status you inherit or the name on a brass plaque in a country club. Family is the unwavering integrity you maintain when everyone else is busy playing the game. I am no longer a captain and I will never be a major, but I am finally the woman my father hoped I would be, a guardian of the truth who operates in the shadows where the light of the gala never reaches. I moved back to the rugged coast of Maine, but this time I didn't settle for a drafty 450-square-foot shop. Instead, I reclaimed the lake house that had once been the Leroy family's pride, purchasing the surrounding 20 acres of dense pine and granite to ensure a perimeter of total, unshakable privacy. I spent $40,000 on a state-of-the-art integrated security system that utilized thermal imaging cameras, seismic ground sensors, and encrypted biometric locks, all linked to a dedicated fiber optic line with a bandwidth capacity that would make the signal intelligence officers at the NSA jealous. The silence of the Maine woods was a symphony compared to the clinking of champagne flutes and the hissed insults of a Parisian embassy, a place where the only thing I had to monitor was the rhythmic tide of the lake and the occasional deer crossing my secondary fence line. One humid Tuesday morning, a single piece of mail arrived in my secure P.O. box, a gritty, standard-issue envelope postmarked from the Alderson Federal Reformatory in West Virginia. Inside was a desperate handwritten plea from Emily, her once perfect calligraphy now shaky and frantic, asking me to deposit funds into her prison commissary account because she couldn't stomach the institutional food and needed basic toiletries that her court-appointed attorney refused to provide. I took the letter into my climate-controlled office, placed it under a high-resolution digital scanner, and ran a full steganographic analysis to ensure she wasn't trying to transmit hidden codes or coordinates to any of Vaughn's remaining associates. Once the software returned a clean result, I watched with a cold, clinical detachment as the industrial-grade shredder turned her desperate words into a pile of meaningless white confetti. The contrast between her current begging and the way she used to flaunt her $800 dinners was a closed loop of justice that required no further emotional investment on my part. I sent her a one-line reply through the monitored prison messaging system, a digital ghost of a message that simply read, "Check the leftovers in the trash," a direct callback to the night she told me to go fetch more Chardonnay like a common servant. I sat on my wraparound cedar porch that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon and turn the lake into a sheet of liquid gold, the $312,000 in back pay sitting untouched in an account she would never be able to reach. The injustice that had defined my life for 3 years had been burned away, replaced by the quiet power of a woman who had learned that the most effective way to win is to become the one thing your enemies can never quantify. Family is supposed to be the bedrock of your existence, the one place where you are safe from the predatory nature of the world, but I had learned through the fire of the Paris Gala that for some, family is just a tactical asset to be liquidated for a higher profit margin until the truth finally catches up. Family isn't about the blood you share or the name on a brass plaque in a country club. Family is the integrity you maintain when the world turns its back on you and the loyalty you show to the only person who never lied to you, yourself. I closed my laptop, the blue light fading from my face, and listened to the peaceful, honest sound of the Maine wilderness reclaiming the night, finally a ghost in a world that no longer had a price tag for my soul. Now I sit on my wide cedar porch at 5 o'clock in the morning, watching the ethereal white mist roll over the surface of the lake like a silent, ghostly army advancing through the Maine pines. I am sipping a single-origin geisha coffee that costs $80 a pound, its complex notes of jasmine and bergamot a stark sensory contrast to the bitter, burnt sludge I drank for 3 years in that drafty repair shop. My name has been formally restored in the Federal Register, the 12-page apology from the Secretary of the Air Force is framed in my study, and my father's legacy is finally clean, no longer tethered to the treasonous filth Emily tried to bury it in. The golden child, the sister who once wore $10,000 Valentino gowns and looked down at me as if I were a stain on the marble, is now just a 7-digit inmate number in a cold, concrete cell at Alderson. True justice isn't a loud, theatrical explosion or a dramatic Hollywood confrontation. It is a clinical, unrelenting series of verified facts and encrypted data packets delivered with lethal precision at the perfect tactical moment. The injustice that once threatened to swallow my entire existence has been transmuted into a quiet, unshakable power. A realization that the person who broke me actually ended up forging me into something far more dangerous than a mere captain. I look out at the 20 acres of private wilderness I now own, knowing that every sensor and every fiber optic line is a testament to the fact that I am no longer a victim of my family's greed but the architect of my own absolute autonomy. Emily thought she could trade my life for a $500,000 consulting fee in a Cayman account, but she failed to realize that you cannot put a price on a mind trained to see through the noise of a sophisticated lie. Family is supposed to be the one place where you find unconditional support and a shared moral compass, a sanctuary where your back is always covered by those who carry your same DNA. However, I have learned through the cold light of 256-bit encryption and the shattering of a ceramic plate in a Parisian embassy that for some, family is just a convenient mask to wear while they sharpen the knife they intend to slide between your ribs. Family isn't about the high society fundraisers or the expensive gifts bought with blood money. Family is the unwavering loyalty of the people who stand by you when the truth finally comes out and the world turns its back. I set my porcelain mug down on the railing, the steam rising into the damp morning air, and I feel a profound sense of peace that no military rank or back paycheck could ever truly provide. The mission my father started in that hidden sentry safe is officially complete, the Ally network is dismantled, and the ghost of Catherine Leroy has finally found her way home to the silence of the woods. I have spent a lifetime being what others expected me to be, but in the process of exposing the toxic rot at the heart of my own bloodline, I finally discovered who I was meant to be all along. Justice is a cold dish, best served with high-definition evidence and a memory that never forgets a single insult. As the sun begins to crest over the horizon, illuminating the lake in a blinding flash of silver, I realize that the most powerful thing you can ever be is invisible to those who think they have already won.